Later Rahula, who was 7 years old, was ordained by the Buddha and became the first novice in the Buddhist tradition. A novice is someone who is in training but has not yet taken the full vows of a monk or nun. Besides Rahula, the Buddha also converted his stepbrother Nanda and several princes of the Sakya clan. Among them were his cousins Ananda and Devdatta. Many years after he left Kapilavatthu, the Buddha went back to visit his father King Suddhodana, who was very ill. The king was very happy to see the Buddha again and felt better. But because he was very old, he could no longer resist the illness, and 2 or 3 days later he passed away. Everyone felt very sad. When King Suddhodana died, Lady Prajapati Gautami felt very sad. She and several other women decided to leave the worldly life and join the Buddha's group of monks to practice the Dharma. So she led the women to see the Buddha. She asked him to accept them as nuns, but the Buddha refused. The women felt very disappointed and cried. But they did not give up their wish to become nuns. When the Buddha was residing at the Mahavaha monastery, Lady Prajapati Gautami and her group of women went to the monastery and told Ananda what had happened. Ananda felt compassion for them and promised to help them. He went to see the Buddha to ask him to be merciful and let the women join the monastic order. But the Buddha refused again. Ananda then said, "I beg you, Lord Buddha, please do a favor to Prajapati Gautami and accept her and other women as nuns, because she has done you great favors in the past. She brought you up as her own son." So finally the Buddha said, "All right, if they are willing to follow the monastic rules I give them, they can leave home and become nuns and practice the Dharma." After leaving the Buddha, Ananda went to tell Lady Prajapati Gautami the good news. All the women were very happy and promised to observe the 8 rules of conduct that the Buddha gave them. Ananda then went back to the Buddha and told him that the women were happy to follow the rules. So Prajapati Gautami became the first Buddhist nun. Of all the disciples of the Buddha, his cousin Ananda was the most devoted to him. So the Buddha selected him to be his close attendant. Another of the Buddha's cousins also became a monk. His name was Devdatta. But he was envious of the Buddha and competed with him, trying to take over the leadership. Devdatta was very conceited, and was jealous of the 2 chief disciples of the Buddha. So he left the Sangha, the community of monks and nuns, and made friends with the crown prince Ajatasattu, son of King Bimbisara. The prince built a private monastery for Devdatta. Devdatta then persuaded the prince to kill his father, King Bimbisara, and make himself king. The prince followed Devdatta's evil scheme and starved his father to death so he could become king. Now Devdatta felt very powerful, because the new king was his friend and supporter. So he decided to kill the Buddha. One evening, while the Buddha was walking past a rocky hill, Devdatta pushed a huge stone down the hillside, intending to kill the Buddha. But the rock suddenly broke into many pieces and only one sharp piece hit the Buddha, on his foot. The Buddha returned to the monastery and was treated by the famous physician Jaivaka. Although his evil plot had failed, Devdatta tried to kill the Buddha again. When the Buddha was on his daily alms round at Rajagaha, Devdatta set loose a wild elephant. But as the wild elephant ran towards the Buddha, it became calm because of the Buddha's enormous loving kindness. After this incident, Devdatta gave up trying to kill the Buddha, but he still wanted to break up the Sangha. To impress the other monks and nuns and disrupt the Sangha, Devdatta asked the Buddha to make stricter rules of conduct for the Sangha. He asked that monks not be allowed to sleep in houses or eat any meat. But the Buddha refused Devdatta's proposal. He said, "If some monks prefer to sleep in the open or not eat meat, they are free to do so. But if they do not wish to live this way, they do not have to." Finally, the Buddha said, "Devdatta, if you try to break up the Sangha, you will reap the evil fruits." Devdatta ignored the Buddha's warning, led away a group of monks and made himself their leader. One day, when Devdatta was asleep, the Buddha's chief disciple Sariputta came and warned the monks about the consequences of evil actions. The monks realized their mistake and returned to the Buddha. When Devadatta woke up, he was so angry that he became ill. Eventually, he began to regret his actions, and he asked his servants to take him to see the Buddha. But he died unexpectedly on the way there. The Buddha taught people for 45 years. He traveled to different kingdoms in India, always on foot. During the rainy seasons, he stayed at monasteries built for him and the Sangha by different supporters. The places the Buddha stayed at most often were Vilavana, near Rajagaha, and Jetavana, near Savathai. During all these years, the Buddha worked hard every day to spread the teachings. The Buddha usually got up before sunrise, took a bath, and then contemplated on whom to teach. When he found someone ready to understand and accept the teaching, he would go and teach that person the same day. After sunrise, the Buddha went to beg for alms from people in the neighborhood. Sometimes he went alone, and sometimes with his monks. Some people also invited him to their homes to accept offerings. After the meal, he taught them the Dharma. Then he returned to the monastery. Back at the monastery, the Buddha rested quietly in the hall, under a tree or in his room, waiting for the monks to return from their alms round. When all the monks and nuns had assembled in the hall, he gave a Dharma talk or just encouraged them to practice the Dharma. Some monks also asked him for personal instructions for their Dharma practice. The Buddha then considered their natures and gave to each of them the individual advice that suited them best. In the summertime, the people from the neighborhood used to visit him in the evenings. Some came to offer him gifts, others to hear his teachings. The Buddha taught them the Dharma using skillful language, so that everyone would benefit. After the talk, everyone would feel happy and satisfied. After the people left, the Buddha usually took a bath. Then he would meditate for some time. After that, he would instruct monks who came from other places. He helped them to understand the difficult parts of the Dharma and so made them very happy. At sunset, the Buddha usually went for a walk to refresh himself. After this, he would again give talks to his monks. Late at night, distinguished people, such as kings, came for advice and instruction in the Dharma. After this, the Buddha went to sleep, usually for 4 hours only. He slept on his right side and woke up before sunrise. Then he entered into deep meditation to explore the natures of his audience for that day. The Buddha always worked very hard to spread the Dharma. When he was not traveling, he spent time not only explaining the Dharma, but also in helping people to solve their daily problems. He was always willing to help people from any station in life, whether they were a housewife, a farmer, or just somebody in need of help. The Buddha was never reluctant to answer difficult questions or explain complicated problems. He never felt irritated by the person asking questions, and always was able to answer correctly. The Buddha always explained the Dharma in a way that was most suited to the natures of his listeners. He welcomed all people. Many who doubted him at first became convinced of the truth of his teaching. They then became his loyal disciples.